On Thanksgiving my son snapped at me, but my smile made him instantly back down. I'm Auntie Grace, 68, living solo in a cozy tucked-away cottage up in the Adirondacks, New York. Used to be a head RN at a major hospital. Used to have a husband. Used to think I was the heart of a family until I realized I was just the placeholder they kept around, out of obligation for the big holidays. There's a quiet you never prepare for when you've slaved over the meal, but there's no spot for you at the head table. I always figured if I never asked for a thing I'd always have a place. But the honest truth is, folks'll keep pushing you back as long as you keep backing up. This ain't a plea for sympathy. I'm just hoping you'll lend an ear, especially if you've been told you're a little much, when all you did was love too hard. And then came that Thanksgiving, a day I'd been prepping for since before the rooster crowed, never knowing it was gonna kick off a truth harder to swallow than any burnt roll. I woke at 5 a.m. on Thanksgiving to cook my famous cornbread dressing, the one everyone raved about. But this year no one had saved me a seat. I brewed a Chemex coffee and watched the dark roast drip into a ceramic mug with a tiny Adirondack deer on it. Outside, the porch was dusted with snow, crisscrossed by chipmunk and dog paw prints. The sky hadn't even lightened up, but I'd already packed my tote, celery, onions, old sourdough bread, all prepped the night before. I hit Chad's place at 6:15 a.m. Nobody answered. I had to knock twice before I heard Tanya's slow drag of slippers. She cracked the door, still in her threadbare flannel robe. "You're early," she said flatly. I grinned, held up the bag. "The dressing needs to set before it goes in the oven, honey." She just nodded and turned inside without another word. The kitchen was the same as last year. Farmhouse table, a little chalkboard calendar by the mudroom door, a classic rock station playing soft guitar on the bows. I shucked my coat and hung it on a chair back. Joe's old wooden cutting board was still in the drawer. I pulled it out and scrubbed it clean. They used to say, "Mom, you gotta get a new one, that one's so beat up." But I kept it. It's scarred and darkened, but it's never warped. Still fits my hand just right. I started dicing the onions. My eyes stung, but it wasn't just the onions. Tanya walked in a few minutes later. "Where'd you put the linen napkins? I want to fold 'em like swans." I pointed to the bottom drawer near the paring knives. She looked, then changed her mind. "Swan folds are so yesterday. Everyone's doing origami stars now." I just kept slicing the celery in even strokes. Around 7 a.m. Wyatt came downstairs, tall, lanky, still foggy. "Grandma, is that your old school drip coffee? I can smell it." I nodded and poured him a cup. "In NYC I only do oat milk lattes, but this smells better." I smiled, scooped him a bit of cranberry relish to taste. He said, "Just like when I was a little dude." Tanya walked in right behind him. "Wyatt, go meet Sierra at the curb. Her ride's here." He gave me a quick, "Bye, Grandma," and left. Tanya started fussing with the flatware, arranging it one piece at a time. I glanced at the clock. 7:32 a.m. The bird was in the oven. I basted it again with herb butter. Chad came down. Late. A beige sweater vest, hair neatly combed. "You didn't have to bring a gift for Maria. She's out of the loop now." I turned to him. "What gives?" "She texted last week saying she'd be here." "She moved out of state. Nobody knows where." "Don't sweat it, Mom." I opened my handbag and pulled out her old letter. Cream-colored paper, blue ink, a slightly slanted script. "Maria used to be my mentee. She's a photojournalist now." In the letter, she mentioned interviewing an elder care nurse in Seattle who talked about me. She always remembered how Miss Grace taught her to handle a pressure dressing. Before I could finish reading, Tanya glanced over and let out a little laugh. "Who writes letters anymore? We have email, DMs, Zoom calls." I folded the letter back along the old creases gently. Tanya folded each napkin like it was a sacred rite. I got it, she didn't need me to cook. She just needed me not to rock the boat. I turned back to the oven, checked the turkey. The scent of sizzling butter rose up, warm and comforting. Just then Wyatt came back in, holding a clutch of scraggly wildflowers, damp from the snow. "Sierra and I grabbed these by the creek. She digs the tiny blue ones. Do you know their name, Grandma?" I lifted one to my nose. "Forget-me-nots." He looked at me. "That's kind of a bummer name." I didn't answer. I turned back to the dressing, added poultry seasoning and a dash of paprika. Tanya stood behind me watching how I mixed it. You use a ton of salt. I paused. Same recipe as always. Chad loves it this way. She didn't respond. Just walked out to the living room. I heard her telling Wyatt to hang up his jacket, asking Sierra about her vegan options. Whatever Sierra said, Tanya already had the last word. I thought about what Wyatt said. That's kind of a bummer name. I used to think it was lovely. A little reminder. Don't forget me. Now it feels more like a soft plea from someone who's slowly fading out of a house they used to belong to. Nearing noon, Chad came back in. He held a piece of paper checking things off. After dinner, can you head out early, Mom? We've got our own plans this evening. I looked up trying to hear if I'd misheard, but he only stared at the list. No extra words, no eye contact, no hesitation, just another to-do item. I wiped my hands on the kitchen towel and stood still for a moment, then went back to slicing the butternut squash. The knife hit the cutting board softly. Each slice felt like it was separating me from something I couldn't hold on to anymore. I plated the turkey on the massive ceramic platter, surrounding it with dried apricots, glazed carrots, fresh sage. Tanya walked by and adjusted the flatware. Wyatt brought water glasses to the table, then paused. You're still wearing that old apron, Grandma. The one with the sunflower patch. I smoothed the worn fabric, smiled. Joe picked out the fabric himself. My mom always said it was totally outdated. He looked around. I don't see any pictures of Grandpa. No, I said softly. No, you don't. Chad called everyone to the table. I washed my hands, poured myself some water, and sat in the chair nearest the kitchen. At the table they served themselves, talking about work, the lousy weather, Boston, and home decor. Nobody mentioned Joe. Nobody asked about the letter. Nobody brought up Maria or the dressing, which was the first dish to disappear. After the meal, Tanya suggested a family photo. She lined everyone up. Chad in the middle, arm around her, Wyatt and Sierra on the left. I stood on the edge, leaning slightly so I wouldn't block the floral centerpiece. The camera flashed. Tanya said, 1, 2, cheese. I smiled just enough. Not because I was happy but because I knew how. Then came dessert. Pecan pie with whipped cream. Wyatt asked if I wanted to try the plant-based one. I declined. My stomach was full of dressing but my heart felt hollow. I cleared the plates, washed my hands under warm water. My apron still had a blotch of cranberry sauce. I folded it carefully to take home. Tanya didn't ask me to stick around to clean, but she didn't ask me not to either. Maybe in this house, I'm just someone remembered enough not to be forgotten, but not quite enough to be kept. Wyatt brought over a mug of hot cider. Wiped out, Grandma. I looked at my hands, fingers wrinkled, skin paper thin. Not wiped out, just a little disoriented. He touched my hand. You're still important. I nodded. Thanks, sweetie. But I knew he was just trying to make me feel better. Chad turned. Better hit the road, Mom. Snow's picking up. We'll handle the cleanup. I put on my coat, picked up the tote holding the leftover dressing. Tanya slipped me a slice of pie wrapped in foil. For you. I nodded. Thanks. Outside, snow had covered the steps. I moved carefully. Joe's old scarf still wrapped around my neck. The smell of the kitchen clung to my sleeves. The porch light was dim, like the look in Chad's eyes whenever I asked the wrong thing. I opened the car door, buckled up. The radio was still playing an old tune, Harvest Moon. The one Joe and I listened to on our very first Thanksgiving. I didn't drive away right away. Through the fogged-up window, I looked back at the house. A family clearing the table, laughing together. Getting ready for the evening I wasn't part of. There was no fury in me, just an emptiness, like I just left a party I thought I was hosting, only to realize I'd been just a passing guest. I looked at Joe's empty chair. No one had mentioned him this year. I thought I had done enough for the day, but somehow the exclusion didn't stop when the meal did. They sat down at the table as if I wasn't even there, though I was the one who had roasted the whole spread. Tanya smoothed the napkin in front of her, poured herself a glass of Chardonnay, and pushed the bottle toward Chad. No one said thank you. No one offered me a drink. I folded my hands in my lap, trying not to stare at the mashed potatoes, the same dish Wyatt once said. Nobody makes them better than Grandma. Last year, Tanya had said. You should sign over the lake cabin so we won't have to hassle with it later on. I laughed then, thinking it was just a light-hearted joke after a few glasses of wine. But now, hearing her introduce the meal to Sierra as our holiday spread, I began to wonder, when exactly did I get pushed out of the circle? Soft music played from a smart speaker by the window. Tanya had picked instrumental tracks, the kind of background music that doesn't hold any memories. Sierra sat close to Wyatt, still a little guarded. She didn't talk much, but her eyes kept darting to me, trying to figure out what kind of grandmother I might be. The cozy kind or the stage 5 clinger. I smiled and picked up my glass of water. Tanya handed a plate to Wyatt. "You should try this one. Chad made it special for the kids." I glanced at the dressing I'd made, still untouched on Tanya's plate. I took a small spoonful of cranberry relish, letting the bright red comfort me. That recipe came from Aunt Florence. She once told me, "Keeping the kitchen warm means more than keeping your words warm." I smiled faintly. I guess I'd done a good job keeping the kitchen warm. "Grandma, do you still remember your RN days?" Wyatt turned to me, his voice gentle. "I've been thinking, maybe I'll go into healthcare." I looked up. That question, it made me feel seen, even if only for a second. There were some night shifts I still remember, especially in winter. We used to take turns walking the halls, warming 4 bags with hot water to keep the patients from getting a chill. "Wow," Tanya cut in. "Nobody does that anymore. What era was that even?" I stayed quiet, just nodded slightly. Wyatt kept looking at me. "No judgment. No ruse." Eyes more like Joe's than Chad's. Chad frowned as he turned a slice of pecan pie. "By the way, Mom, about the lake cabin. We've handled it." I turned my head, trying to hear clearly. "Handled? What do you mean, honey?" "I mean, we'll talk later. Let's eat first." I set my fork down. The lake cabin was built by Joe using the bonus from his last promotion before he retired. We painted the walls together, planted lilacs by the window every spring. After he passed, I moved in. It wasn't until the fall when I took that bad spill in 2020 that they insisted I move back to the city so they could look after me better. Then the doorbell rang. Chad opened it. Nate, my youngest, stood there, gloves still on, hair a mess. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic from Woodstock was a nightmare." "Dinner's pretty much over," Chad replied flatly. Nate stepped in, glanced at the spread, then slid into the seat beside me. He leaned in and whispered, "You still have the cabin documents you signed when you were sick?" I turned toward him. "Why are you asking?" "Just checking," he said with a thin smile. "You weren't really all there at that time, were you?" He didn't speak loudly, but just loud enough to chill me. I remembered every word I signed, every page brought to my bedside. Every word Chad said. "It's just temporary, Mom, so I can cover the property taxes for you." Before I could respond, Tanya spoke up, her voice as soft as falling snow. "You're not living there anymore. It just makes sense for the house to be under our names." No one said a word. Even Wyatt went silent. I held my glass, fingers shaking slightly. Tanya smiled politely at Sierra, then turned to me as if she just explained something completely logical. "Paperwork can be a real headache, Mom, and we're just better at managing these things." I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. The pecan pie was sliced. Nate buried himself in his phone. Chad poured more wine. Wyatt still looked at me in a way I couldn't quite name. Not pity, not anger, more like a light bulb turning on. I tried chewing a bite of pie, but my throat tightened. It had been a long time since I sat at a holiday table and felt this irrelevant, even though the food was mine. Even though that lake cabin was once the place where I rocked each of my kids through their fevers. Chad talked about a new project. Tanya chimed in about her office moving near UAlbany. Nate added a few words, then went silent again. I looked at my hands. The age spots were darker under the yellow light. "Do you still have your medical records, Mom?" Nate asked, his tone hard to read. "Yes," I answered, not looking up. "They're in the filing cabinet at my apartment." "Didn't you once write a thank you note to your doctor?" Tanya tilted her head. "Who even does that anymore?" I pressed my lips together. Maria once said she liked the feeling of holding a real letter. Tanya gave a soft chuckle and moved on to another topic. When it came time to clear the table, I started to rise, but Tanya had already gathered the plates. "Seat, Mom. Let the daughter-in-law handle it." I said nothing. Inside me, a sound barely rose, like the closing of a door from the inside. Wyatt returned with the empty glasses. Sierra leaned close to him, speaking low. Just enough for me to hear. Did that house really used to belong to her? Wyatt didn't answer. His silence and Sierra's questioning eyes, they felt like a quiet warning. But I was tired of being quiet, and what I feared would happen came faster and more painfully than I had imagined. I said one thing and got slapped by the very person I gave birth to, raised, and once believed would protect me when I was at my lowest. The sound of that hand striking my cheek echoed sharp through a room already too silent. No one gasped. No one even breathed. Only the clatter of a knife hitting the wooden floor and the soft metallic tumble of a spoon tipping over in that strange frozen stillness. I turned my head slowly. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just looked at Chad with empty eyes. His face was crimson, his breath heavy. Tanya placed her hand over his as if to calm him, but said nothing. Nate frowned but stayed silent. Wyatt stood still. And Sierra? I saw her holding her phone beneath the table, one finger resting on the record button. When Chad was little, he once punched a kid who called me an old bag. I still remember the day he came home with a black eye from the principal, but proud. Nobody insults my mom, he'd said. But today that slap came from him. And not because someone insulted me, but because I dared to ask for respect. I only asked one question, I said quietly. Why were you planning to transfer everything I own without asking me? No one answered right away. Tanya looked away. Nate scoffed. Then Chad slammed his hand on the table and stood up. You think you still have a say in anything? I looked at him. I was just asking. She's ancient, Nate snapped. She doesn't even remember how the paperwork works. I kept my eyes on Chad. My fingers clutched the napkin not to hide my face but to steady myself. So everything I lived for, everything I saved, no longer belongs to me? The slap. Chad moved toward me, fast, sharp, and then his hand came down. Sierra gasped and dropped her spoon. Wyatt jumped up. Dad! I stayed seated. My cheek burned, but inside there was only a hollow, chilling calm. I gave a faint smile. Not out of forgiveness, not out of endurance, but because now I finally saw things for what they truly were. Thank you, I whispered. Now I know I put my faith in the wrong people. Chad froze for a moment. Tanya mumbled something to Wyatt, but I didn't hear it. The only sound I focused on was the sleet tapping against the porch roof, a slow, steady reminder that winter was arriving early this year. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out. The screen lit up. Maria Chen. Are you okay? I didn't reply. I just stared at her name, my former mentee. The one who once wrote that she wanted to become someone who tells the truth without having to soften it. Chad dropped back into his chair. No one touched their food. Napkins crumpled, plates stained with cranberry sauce. Red blotches spreading across the white linen like faded blood. Tanya sighed. Maybe you should go upstairs and rest, Mom. I'll clean up. I stood. I didn't say thank you. Didn't say a word. I just walked upstairs. Step by step. My left hand still held the phone. My right cheek still stung. Upstairs the house was so quiet. I could hear the wind whistling beneath the window frame. The guest room hadn't changed. Pale gray sheets and Joe's old bedside lamp. A wedding photo of Chad and Tanya on the shelf. A photo I had given them. They never changed the frame, but a thin layer of dust had settled on it. I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands no longer trembled. I thought about the slap, not because it hurt, but because it had come so easily, like emotion without weight, without hesitation. What chilled me most wasn't the force, but the look in Chad's eyes as he did it. Not angry, not panic, just certain, like I was a problem that needed to be handled efficiently. I looked out the window. The backyard was already coated in thin ice. The maple tree stood bare. The summer lawn was gone, replaced by dark soil and leaves pressed into wet snow. I got up and walked to the small mahogany cabinet by the wall. The third drawer had an old lock, one of those with a tiny key like the kind I used back when I was an RN. I opened it. Everything was still there. A dark brown leather folder tied with a red ribbon. The smell of aged leather and paper stirred something deep in my chest. I placed the folder on the bed and untied the ribbon. Each paper was in its place. Copies of my medical records from 2020, the lake cabin deed before the transfer, the temporary power of attorney documents, and a letter I once wrote but never sent to an old lawyer friend of Joe's. I had kept this file for 3 years not out of suspicion, but because I knew one day I'd need it. I picked up the smallest slip of paper. It held only one line handwritten. Don't step back any further. No one's clearing the path for you anymore. I wrote that sentence one night in a rented apartment in Syracuse just after recovering from my fall. Chad hadn't visited. Nate had texted, too swamped. Hang in there, Mom. I understood. But from that moment I began collecting papers, copies, recorded calls. Not to fight but to be ready. The phone buzzed again. Maria wrote, "If you need anything, just say the word. I'll be there." I didn't reply, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I put the folder back, locked the drawer, and stood up. In the mirror I adjusted my collar. My cheek was still red. But my eyes, they were clearer than they'd been all morning. Not because I was angry, but because I finally saw everything plainly. As I stepped out, I saw Sierra at the top of the stairs. She didn't say a word, but when our eyes met, I knew she had seen it all. I descended slowly, no rush, only the soft whistle of wind outside, and inside me a sound rising steadily. Not grief, not rage, but a quiet plan taking shape, note by note. That night I didn't sleep a wink. Every piece I had gathered over 3 years had found its place. The next morning I walked downstairs, no longer the woman they had grown used to. Not the one who waited, not the one who stayed silent. I once stayed quiet through a New Year's Eve with tears, a Christmas without gifts. But this Thanksgiving, I would bring with me a folder that could silence an entire room. The living room still held the scent of turkey and sweet glaze from a kitchen no one had finished cleaning. The TV was on, broadcasting news about blizzard warnings sweeping across upstate New York. Cold gray-blue maps filled the screen, but no one was watching. I walked down the stairs, gripping the brown leather folder. The only thing in that house that held any real weight. Chad sat scrolling through his phone, unfocused. Nate was whisper arguing with Tanya. Wyatt held a glass of water. He wasn't drinking. Sierra looked at me, and this time it wasn't pity in her eyes. It wasn't confusion. It was the look of someone who knew something was about to go down. I stood in the center of the room and said calmly, "I need to speak." No one answered. But no one left. I placed the folder on the coffee table, opened it, and laid out each paper like poker chips. The deed to the lake cabin, a letter from a lawyer dated 2020, a document certifying my legal competence, emails from the asset management firm. Each page clear, stamped, signed. I had prepared these in silence for 3 years. The lake cabin is still under my name, I said. And it will stay that way until I die or I decide otherwise. Nate stood up, stepped toward me, hand outstretched. "Mom, let us at least take a peek at the papers." Wyatt stepped in front. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Let her finish." Tanya backed into the corner, phone pressed to her ear. "She knows. Stop calling. Wait for me outside." I ignored it all. In my hand, I held the final page, a letter from Maria Chan, signed, confirming tomorrow's meeting with a journalist from an independent paper. The letter, "She's coming here with a camera, and she's not coming alone." Chad scoffed. "You're really going to drag the family into the media?" I didn't answer. I looked around the room, the same room where I used to cook, wipe down picture frames, hang up stockings, and got told I was making a fuss. I had spent too many years believing soft words that meant nothing. "I tumbled down the stairs," I said. "Back in 2020, I spent more than 10 days in the hospital. No one came. Only Maria, a former student all the way from New York City. She brought apples and asked just one thing. 'Do you have anyone looking out for you?' No one replied, but I saw Wyatt's gaze soften. Nate dropped his eyes. I didn't need them to speak. Not now. I sat down for the first time all evening and spoke slowly, deliberately. "I've established a private trust, and if anyone tries to have me committed, you're welcome to try." Chad looked up at me. But this time there was no scorn in his eyes, no certainty, only doubt, maybe even fear. No one said anything after that. Chad sat frozen. He wouldn't look at the folder, as if it had sliced straight through every calculation he'd made. Tanya stood in the corner, phone still in hand but no longer calling. Nate paced, muttering something about, "There's no law that lets her do this without telling us." I calmly gathered the papers, stacked them neatly back into the leather folder. No rush, no challenge, but my hands were steady now. Are you really going to make this public? Tanya asked, her voice thin. I looked at her. I'm only sharing what I own. Am I right to decide my own life? Wyatt stepped out from his corner. He sat beside me, said nothing, but in that moment I saw it. The look in his eyes was no longer a child's. It was a man's. A man beginning to see right from wrong inside a house that had grown far too used to bending the truth. My phone buzzed. A message from Maria. I can come earlier. I'll bring the camera and a friend from the local council. If you're ready, I'll let you tell the story. I replied, I'm ready. Then I looked up and for the first time that night met Chad's eyes. I've stayed silent long enough. Not because I was weak, but because I still believed that one day my children would understand. But if I keep believing, I'll have nothing left to hold for myself. Chad stared at me. No anger, but no confidence either. He stood, took one step back and said nothing. Sierra spoke up, barely a whisper. I think I recorded the whole thing. Everyone turned to her. She still sat in the corner, phone in hand, screen softly glowing. Her voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the tension like a clear wind. Chad turned his eyes, locking on his son, then shifting to Sierra. And for one brief moment I saw something flicker in him. Not rage, but the realization that he had lost something he couldn't get back, control. For the first time all evening I saw Chad, the son who thought he'd planned every move, no longer sure of himself. The next morning, I left that house carrying my folder and a resolve clearer than ever before. I knew I wasn't alone. And I knew I didn't have to fight by their rules anymore. I didn't have a lawyer standing by my side. I had evidence, journals, and a leather folder I'd kept sealed for 3 years. The law office of Denise Geller in Rutland, Vermont smelled faintly of cinnamon tea. On the desk, an old porcelain cup still let off steam beside a stack of papers clipped in yellow. Denise was in her 50s, salt and pepper hair, calm voice. She never interrupted me. We'll file the response first thing tomorrow morning, she said. I've contacted the county clerk and based on this file, she tapped a finger on the documents I'd handed her, they have no right to petition for conservatorship unless they can prove you're legally incapacitated. I didn't say a word, just nodded. Sierra had sent the audio recording that very night. Wyatt had written a signed statement, including photos of the kitchen from that evening. I had asked Maria to print out the draft of her article. I hadn't read it in full yet. I only saw the title, Elder on the Edge. We'll need a copy from the bank, Denise added. A record of withdrawals over the last 6 months. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a slim envelope. Here. I visited the bank last week. They gave me a full statement. And Tanya once said she'd hold on to a portion of my money when I was discharged. Denise opened the envelope. Her expression didn't change. You've been preparing this for a while. 3 years, I said. Since the first time they told me, Mom, don't go grocery shopping by yourself anymore. It's too dangerous. That afternoon, I returned to the lake cabin, the house that still had my name on the deed, despite what they believed. The sky was overcast. A patrol officer stood at the front gate, just as I had requested through Denise's office, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted a witness if one was needed. Maria arrived at 1 p.m. She was thinner than in her photos, her hair tied back, reading glasses perched on her nose. With her came a middle-aged man, a member of the local town board. Would you like me to record this? Maria asked. I can do audio only if you're not comfortable. I shook my head. Do it your way. Just don't gild the lily. I won't, she said. We sat in the living room. I reopened the folder, laid everything out neatly. Contracts, handwritten letters, photos, even the recording of Tanya scolding Sierra in the kitchen for letting Wyatt get involved in adult matters. Maria wrote in silence. She only asked 3 questions, and when I answered I didn't speak with the voice of a betrayed mother. I spoke with the voice of someone who had grown used to not being believed and who, this time, brought proof. By late afternoon, Maria turned off the recorder. She looked at me for a moment, then nodded. The article will be reviewed within 3 days, but honestly, I think the headline alone is enough to make some people think twice. I didn't respond, just looked out the window. The snow had started to fall. The next morning, Denise accompanied me to the courthouse. The room was small, paneled in dark wood, scented with old polish and floor cleaner. Not many people, just a few staff and 3 people I once called family. Chad wore a navy suit, face tired. Tanya wasn't there. Nate trailed in behind, silent. I stood in the center of the room. In front of me sat Judge Harrison, nameplate on the desk. Next to me was Denise holding the folder. I hadn't prepared a speech. I hadn't written anything down. I brought only 3 things. My ID, the folder, and a note handwritten by Wyatt. My grandma isn't crazy. She just doesn't want to be treated like she doesn't exist. The judge Denise handed over the recording, the bank statements, the testimonies from Sierra and Wyatt. Maria wasn't present, but her article draft had already been entered into the record. Chad didn't object. Nate didn't either. When the judge asked if anyone had additional comments, they said nothing. I looked at Chad. I have documents. I have proof. I don't need my children calling the shots for me anymore. No one stopped me. The judge simply nodded, confirmed the validity of my documentation, and declared that my legal rights and mental capacity were intact. There are no grounds for guardianship, he said. When I exited the courtroom, Chad was already walking away quickly without a word. Nate drifted toward the end of the hall, and Maria's camera, positioned just beyond the side corridor, only managed to catch turning away their backs. I didn't follow, didn't ask why. I stepped through the heavy wooden doors out into the cold and felt the winter air press against my collar. A reminder that I was alive. And this time I got to decide what that meant. After everything, I reclaimed my autonomy. But what I felt wasn't triumph. It was peace. A deeper kind. The kind I'd been searching for quietly for years. I used to think I needed an apology. But what I really needed was a moment of quiet and a chair I chose for myself. This morning the white curtains drifted like waves. The lake out front was no longer frozen. Its surface reflected the pale sky of early June. I brewed tea in my old porcelain pot, cut a slice of apple pie I'd baked the night before, and set everything down on the long wooden table beneath the window facing the lake. The old armchair, the one Joe bought back in '82 from a little furniture shop in Utica, was still in its place. The old armchair, every time I dusted it, I remembered what he used to say. This chair isn't special, except that it belongs to us. Tanya called it outdated. Chad wanted to donate it, but I kept it like a part of me no one had the right to price tag. The post office brought a blue postcard today. Handwritten, careful lettering. Wyatt's handwriting.
Grandma, Isho Sociologie.
The biggest lesson of my life came from you. Thank you for not staying silent. I'll never forget that. I leaned the card against the teapot. Didn't read it again. Didn't need to. Maria arrived at 9 a.m. She carried a large canvas bag with a Bluetooth speaker, a few books, and a printed copy of her article, the one that made the front page last week. The title, The Forgotten Chair. Stories of Mothers Pushed to the Edge. I didn't ask how many people read it. I didn't ask whether Chad saw it. What mattered was already in front of me. Maria. A circle of 6 women seated in the backyard, and sunlight filtering through the maple leaves onto the brick patio. Mary, once a court clerk, now wore silver hair and reading glasses. Next to her was Rhonda, divorced at 55. 2 others had recently moved to the Adirondacks after retiring. No one asked why anyone was there. No one demanded stories, but when I began, they listened. No one checked the time. I didn't say much, just shared a few moments at Thanksgiving night, the sound of the knife hitting the floor, the folder I kept locked away for 3 years, and the smile I gave my son right after the slap. Maria read the opening line from her article. Her voice trembled slightly. They say a mother is the foundation of a family, but foundations crack, and when no one looks down, they can collapse without warning. The group went silent. I nodded, not sure if at the words or at myself. Either way, I had survived the winter, and now I was here in a house no one wanted to take anymore. After the reading, Maria stayed to help me clean the table. We didn't speak much, just folded napkins, rinsed dishes, and let the silence settle gently between us. I poured more tea into 2 small cups. They didn't match, but both were unbroken. Maria looked at me as if about to say something, then just smiled. When I wrote that piece, she said, I thought people would push back. But what surprised me was how many wrote to say thank you. I nodded. One woman from Montana, she continued, said, I thought I was the only one who felt invisible. I wasn't sure if I felt sad or relieved. We, the quiet mothers, had never been alone, just scattered. Each of us sitting at the edge of a table, believing patience would someday be understood. Not everyone betrayed me, and not everyone needs forgiveness. Wyatt, the boy who once held my hand at the bus stop, had grown up, and he chose to stand in the light. Maria, the former student who once sent me postcards from New York, had become the voice for those who were never heard. Tanya, Chad, Nate. I don't say their names anymore. Not out of anger, but because I don't need to. I don't need to be in their lives to feel whole in mine. That afternoon I dusted the bookshelf, rearranged old photos. Some I packed away, some I left in view. Everything in the lake cabin now was chosen by me. On the table sat a leather-bound journal I bought last year. The first page was still blank. I opened it and wrote a single line. Today I begin living without waiting for permission. Not a loud beginning, but enough to know I no longer need a seat at someone else's table to feel like I belong. I turned off the radio. I no longer needed old songs to fill the quiet. I placed the teapot on a wooden tray, folded a light blanket, and stepped onto the porch. The pie had gone cold. The breeze skimmed the lake, drifted through the open window from morning. I sat down in the old armchair beside the window, facing the water. Evening sunlight spilled across my sleeve. No phone rang, no one knocked, and I felt at peace. There are dinners you spend all day cooking for only to realize there's no seat at the table for you. I used to believe that sacrifice was love. That if I stayed quiet long enough, they would understand. But I've learned this. If you don't value yourself, even the people closest to you might turn away. Like an old armchair that once kept the house warm all winter. But when no one feels cold anymore, it gets quietly pushed into a corner. If this story touches something in you, take a moment to look around.